Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on bringing affordable military-grade security to your small to medium business. And I should say that I'd like to add the single word, simply. So it'll be a theme of today's webinar where we'll be discussing security, affordability, and simplicity, and with a particular emphasis on small to medium businesses. And joining me today is Jeramia Cohen, who's the Chief Information Security Officer of Simpatico. It's a firm that is an IT services and security services provider to hundreds of small to medium businesses. So welcome, Jeramia. Kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Appreciate being here and having me on with this topic. You know, it's close to home for us. Like you said, we're an SMB-focused company. Jeramia Cohen, Simpatico Systems. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer. I've been with the company upwards of 7 years at this point. Happy to be here.
Thank you so very much. My name is Sanjeev Verma. I am chairman and co-founder of an MIT startup called Prevail. We provide end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing systems literally to hundreds of defense companies and hence the military grade security. And we're here to again have a conversation with Jeramia on essentially laying out the threat landscape today. What's changing? Why is there a need in the first place for a small to medium business to care about having military grade security in the first place? Why is it necessary? Why should you care? What is military grade security? What are the simple things that can be done to bring military grade security to your environments? And to explore that, we'll have a nice conversation where we hope to bring some of our insights and Jeremiah's deep knowledge of both security and small to medium businesses to hopefully provide you with some understanding of modern security and some of the things that you can practically do, simply do, and easily do to take your business to a very high level of security. So let's start this conversation. Jeramia, how would you like to begin?
Well, I think it's key that there's been a lot already in 2021 that's happened, right? In the last 6 months, it feels like every day we're seeing something in the news. It's a huge name. It's something that's, far reaching. Sanjeev, can you paint the landscape a little bit for us about some of the things that have happened over the last 6 months, kind of in relation to what we're talking about?
I'd be happy to, Jeramia. So I think that, this year has been a landmark year from a cybersecurity perspective. Last year, I think, was the year of the COVID. This year, for most practitioners and most folks in industry and government, is the year of cyber vulnerabilities. So let's start with some basically earth-shattering things that occurred. I'll start with the SolarWinds breach, which many of you probably heard of. And it was a breach where SolarWinds, which is a provider of management software, networking software, their systems were breached and they were used to in turn go and breach the systems of the United States government, particularly Department of Homeland Security. And ultimately the attackers made their way to their favorite target, which is electronic mail communications and files, including to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and to the very teams that are responsible for protecting us against foreign threats. And so this attack is a landmark attack in the sense that it was the first attack of the scale that we have now seen, where in essence multiple US government divisions, offices and branches were breached and sensitive information hacked. And it got the wheels of motion spinning in the government on how to deal with these sorts of things, because while you might say as small to medium businesses, well, that's the government, these folks have sensitive information, they need to be, anticipating such hacks, and it's got nothing to do with me. You'll find out shortly that it has everything to do with you. So the year started with the SolarWinds breach for the US government, and then moved on to something that you will start relating to, which was an even bigger breach with Microsoft Exchange servers. Now, these are servers that host, electronic mail. Many of you, if not most of you, use those servers. And in this particular case, again, a foreign adversary attacked the servers directly, took administrative privileges on them, had full access to electronic mail, passwords, and sensitive data, not just for government entities, but for about 30,000 businesses. And the primary attack surface for them was actually small to medium businesses. So as I paint the surface, I'm going to hand this back over to you, Jeremiah. Tell us a little bit more about the Exchange server breach.
Well, we've most of us have heard about Zeroday vulnerabilities. Essentially, this is another one of those events where something was discovered and it was too late. And the activity, we were already seeing. Again, I think maybe FireEye was part of this as well. They were seeing some events where web shells were being created for persistence, remote access, remote execution, and reconnaissance was being performed on these systems. And so essentially, this was a 0 day, right? And like you said, estimated, I think it was 250,000 servers fell victim to this. And, unfortunately, this is one of those things where you essentially, as a security practitioner, as an IT practitioner, now it's a reactionary mode. Now it's, what do we do? How do we prevent this? How do we gain visibility? And depending on the size of your organization, that could be, hundreds of servers that you've got to address. And so we're in a reactionary mode. And the problem is that most of this has already happened. And the threat actors have very sophisticated and sometimes not even sophisticated tools where they can gain access to these things pretty quickly. And they have tools to kind of see where the valuable assets are, where the easy targets are, and they go straight for it. And so we end up in a situation where, businesses are falling victim. Now that creates a whole chain of events for that organization, because depending on the communications going through that, whether it's, private, it's public information, proprietary information being passed internally, now all this stuff is out there. And now you've got a whole incident response situation on your hands where an organization now has to have a deep dive, obtain legal representation for that confidentiality. And so now it just creates a snowball effect. And for it to impact that many servers across the country and 30,000 organizations, I would suspect that there's probably some valuable information that was gleaned from a majority of those systems. And so it puts us in a pretty precarious situation.
Well, Jeremiah, actually, thanks for giving us a pretty nice technical description. I'm going to simplify the attack even further. And it has bearing to our conversation later in terms of the security principles involved. So in essence, the simple version of the Microsoft Exchange server attack was that, as Jeremiah said, 0 day vulnerabilities. That means threats that weren't known or heard of in the server software itself were exploited. And in essence, attackers used a user account to go log into the server. So any user who's getting email, they basically breached an account, logged onto the server, then they elevated their privileges to become an administrator. And once you become an administrator, you get access to everybody's emails, everybody's passwords, and that's exactly what they did. So again, that's technical stuff, and it has bearing for what we're going to be discussing. But far more important, not only were they looking for interesting information, but it was a much more fundamental attack on small to medium business, where the next step that they took was they basically added dear cry ransomware software on the servers. So if you say, well, it doesn't really impact me, I don't have sensitive stuff, it doesn't really matter. Your business has value. And so what the attack then did was added ransomware software. And Acer, obviously big computer company, I think was the first one to be hit by this, But now these 30,000 organizations that have been hit, unless you're absolutely positive that you've been able to clean the attack, which is impossible to be certain of, the next mode of attack for them is simple ransomware, which is a theme that we're going to be coming to. So one, it's they're looking for interesting information, but second, it's essentially trying to extract some of the value that you built in your business for themselves. And the third, thing I think this year that impacted a lot of people over and above the Microsoft Exchange server attack, which is getting closer to home, was the Colonial pipeline attack. Again, a ransomware attack on critical infrastructure, gas shortages, spikes in prices, but it just gives us a taste for the kind of hacks that are possible. Nobody would have, even in a Colonial pipeline, thought that, oh, gee, like who's concerned about attacking us? In hindsight, if there's commercial value, you'll be attacked. So these are the three sort of important attacks that have changed the landscape of our nation's approach to cybersecurity. And it has had consequences, those consequences being both guidance from the National Security Agency and an executive memo from President Biden asking for significantly enhanced security, but in essence, a particular form of security that you have not heard of, or perhaps you have, most haven't. And it's saying that basically adopt systems based on zero trusts. And so we're going to explore that a little bit. Jeremiah, any
Sanjeev, if I could add something. So, we're talking about SMBs, right? And a lot of the things we hear in the news are very, federally focused, enterprise organizations. This isn't just a federal issue, right? It's not just a large enterprise issue or the supply chain, right? This is something that happens and can happen and does happen, statistically shows that SMBs, small, medium-sized businesses, are the biggest target and receive the majority of attacks because it's known that they don't particularly have the infrastructure, have systems in place, or essentially what you were about to speak about here in a second. So I just wanted to bring that home. But like you said, we've talked about this landscape, Sanjeev. We understand a little bit about some of the inner workings of that. It's a lot in the news. But as you mentioned, this executive order with Biden, and the call for zero trust. Can you talk about that a little bit, about zero trust and how that fits into this picture?
I'd be happy to. So let's, I think, use their language, because I think they use very good language to describe zero trust in their memo. So let's share a single slide that describes what zero trust is for the audience, and I'd be happy to go and speak to it. So in response to the SolarWinds attack, in response to the Exchange server breaches and so forth, the National Security Agency, which is, again, for those that don't know, is the biggest cybersecurity offense and defense organization perhaps in the world, and entrusted with protecting certainly government networks, but overall government networks from some cyber breach. They came up with the following statement, which is on the left, that it basically says that, look, traditional cybersecurity is about perimeter-based network defenses, and there are layers upon layers of security that are designed to provide this network of perimeter-based defenses, and they are unable to meet the cybersecurity needs in the current threat environment. Those are their words. And then they further go on to say that we advocate a zero trust model, and they describe it beautifully. They say that the zero trust model eliminates trust in any element, node, or service by assuming that a breach is inevitable or has already occurred. And President Biden, in response to, again, these attacks, went to all agencies and said that, look, you need to move towards zero trust. So far, we've been walking you through the landscape and bringing more and more sort of cyber principles into this. And I promise you, we will simplify these. So let's start with your question, Jeremiah, was, what is the zero trust? And for, folks that have just listened to me and said, gee, I'm scratching my head. Now you're telling me that I have to assume that a breach is inevitable or has occurred, and how do I protect myself if the breach has occurred? So let's take a look at that step by step, and I'll explain how it can be done. So let's show you what is a perimeter-based, defense. Basically, if you look at your networks, they're designed with a fort mentality. You've got email, you've got file systems, you use cloud services, anything, you got put data on a server over there. And those servers are protected by the equivalent of a wall. That wall could be a firewall, or a wall could be just a password. It's a perimeter. Think of it like a lock on your door in front of your house. And so the approach is that these walls will prevent the attacker from getting through. But what we have discovered is that these walls are all made of software, and software has bugs. And so if you look at it, these walls will be inevitably penetrated. So if you look at the next slide, it basically, shows that the software, the walls have a little hole in them. And if you click again, the attacker uses these holes to get in. This is what happened with the Exchange server breach. This is what happens when somebody breaks into your password and gets to your sensitive data, etc. So what we have is a series of systems that rely on walls. And once the attacker gets through the walls, they get to the information. But the realization for Zero Trust is, no matter how tall the wall, no matter how sophisticated the maker of those walls, they will ultimately be breached. So you got to bring a system that assumes the attacker is going to get through and yet protect that information. So how do you do that? And you'll say, well, that sounds fantastical and these systems don't exist and so forth. And we're here to show you that no, that is not the case. So before I delve into the details of computer security, I'll give you an analogy from our human body on what a perimeter-based defense is and what a zero trust defense is. So we're designed with skin and so forth, and our perimeter defense basically protects us against viruses and so forth. But our body isn't designed just to say that, okay, that defense is going to work all the time. We got an immune system, which even when the virus gets in, protects us. Another equivalent of that is during the COVID era, masks were basically a perimeter defense. They work, they're effective for sure, but at the end of the day, they're not foolproof. And if the virus gets through, the vaccine is the equivalent of a zero trust system, because it says no matter what, the virus is going to get through, and then the body can kick in and protect you. So in computer security, we got these same principles that apply, and there are simple systems that exist that can deliver this zero trust. And we'll be happy to share with you some basics of how that works. Jeremiah, would you like to add something to that?
No, I think that's a great analogy, Sanjeev. But one of the things that probably the audience is looking for, and what we're talking about, is the SMB space, right?
Yeah.
And what that means for a small business. When we talk about zero trust, we hear it again. It's usually tied to enterprise space. It's not something small businesses are really paying attention to. And typically, the SMB's network is inherently flat, right? Meaning there's not much depth to it. It's very simple. The architecture inside is typically very simple. And especially with a lot of the cloud adoption, now you're getting some cloud pieces or software defined networks. And although I think, I know Prevail is a fantastic piece and layer within this that we're talking about for small businesses. I read a pretty great article that highlights, it was in, I think it was in CISO Mag from EC Council, but they kind of highlight the 5 things that a small organization can do. And really it's any organization, doesn't matter the scale. There are some practical steps for implementing zero trust, and what that means. So, the key part is you have to know what you're protecting before you can protect it. So the identification, classification of data, segmentation of data, it's essentially knowing your data. What is critical data? What's less critical data? Where should I apply these foundational, the zero trust aspect to this? That's step number one to even understand that. So even like a system with Prevail, how do you know what data you need to put in there, or, and we can talk about how Prevail kind of eliminates that a little bit, and the fact that it's inherently, secure. So in addition to that, it's the mapping of data within that organization, right? Where does that data flow? Who has access to it? What are the people, processes, and technology that have access to this critical data that we're trying to protect with this zero trust? And so if you don't know where that goes, what applications are touching it, where it is and why it's going there, it's kind of hard to start creating this zero trust environment. So it's key that you have that. And once you have those pieces in place, now you can start talking about network architecture. And again, we've talked about, or people have talked about, this sounds like a great idea, but it sounds like I'm going to have to replace my entire infrastructure. I'm going to have to rip and replace everything I've invested in at this point and essentially start over. And that's so not the case. This is something that can be implemented in augmenting your current systems, and you have to start with these things. So then you can get into that network architecture, the segmentation, that software defined network. When we start talking about cloud, which is essentially what that is, where that data can be, who can have access to it. And then the monitoring of that is also key, because now we've created these policies, we've set these things up internally as a small business. We know where our data is, we know why it's going there, who has access, we've kind of divided it up. But now we have to validate that, trust but verify in that aspect. And so we have to have monitoring of that and making sure that the policies we've put in place, the data the assets we've classified are staying within that parameter that we've defined in our policies, and it's going where it's supposed to, and the people that access it are the people that should be accessing it. And then the last step really is, once you've matured that, which happens over a period of time, you can start implementing some automation and orchestration to that, right? There's various aspects and how you can keep that going. And so that's kind of a very, manual process, and starting from the ground up, if you don't have a go-to solution. And so these are some pretty practical steps where we can start, that doesn't necessarily cost money in the beginning, just to start identifying that data and figuring out where it goes. But I think that's key for small businesses to understand. It's not a rip and replace. It's not a massive investment. It's really fundamentals about your key data within your environment. Would you agree?
I think, you make a good point, and I think your points are well taken for, I think, organizations that understand that they have different kinds of data and so forth. But I'm going to go and take this conversation one step, lower.
Okay.
And in essence, say, look, to the average small to medium business, assume that you don't know anything about this stuff. You don't know how to classify data and so forth. How can you bring, modern principles of cybersecurity to your business? And I'll start by saying, every small business ought to know that their important information is in the form of files. So if you don't have any classification system or whatever, you want to basically go and protect all your files. And now if you're a defense company, etc., you want to classify that, etc. But I'm saying you're an average business, you want to go and protect your file. And the second, you all know that your favorite attack vector is electronic mail communication and communication of that ilk. And so you want to be sure that you know who you're speaking with, and that communication is also protected from attack. And so the simplest thing that a small business can do to protect itself is, number one, have secure zero trust systems for communication and secure zero trust systems for file storage and sharing. But before we go further, now is perhaps a time that I can explain, what is a zero trust, system, and how does it differ? So again, I'll take the simplest approach over here, because it is actually quite simple. So look, in your existing file sharing systems or existing email systems, there are really just three players in there. There's the user, and they're protected by a password. There's an admin in your company that's handling your IT systems, and that person or persons have access to all your information. And then there are servers, whether they are on-premise or in the cloud, that are storing your files, emails, etc. So now a zero trust system basically assumes that the password will be stolen, and you know that it will be. It assumes that the admin will be breached, because now we have seen that every single case If you can breach a user's password, you can breach an admin's password. And if you breach the admin's password, you get at everything. And finally, that they'll be able to get to the server. So if you look at your existing OneDrives and Google Drives, etc., that's the reason why you'll basically be breached. So what a zero trust system does is, number one, it starts with these principles of assuming a breach. And so the first fundamental of these systems is it encrypts the information from the sender to the recipient and all the way in between. It's a technique that's called end-to-end encryption. And when you have end-to-end encryption, what happens is that the information, say your files and your emails, stay encrypted on the server. So what does that mean? If they're encrypted on the server and there's no key to it, when the attacker gets to the server, they basically get nothing. The second is your admin. What if you could design a system where instead of only one admin having the ability to access your information, it was designed more like our nuclear launch keys, where you distribute trust amongst an admin and an owner of a company, and you need permission from both before you can access the information. So now if you can basically attack the admin, you don't lose the entire organization's emails and files and critical information, because the admin by themselves can't do damage. And then the third is passwords. And one way to think about it is have a system that has no passwords whatsoever. And you'll say, well, how do you prevent and authenticate a user? And so you got modern systems that instead of a password, use an encryption key that is tied to your device. So if you got a key on your device, it does two things. Unlike a password, you can't guess the key. There's no known technology on earth that can guess those keys. And second, since it's tied to your device, you can basically limit access to the information, much like what Jeremiah was saying, only to your devices, so you can't have an attacker sitting remotely and accessing it. So again, these are abstract principles so far, but we're going to now show you how these things come together. And in particular, I want to make one comment about the passwords. Just day before yesterday, Microsoft again announced that as a consequence of the SolarWinds breach, their customer support networks were breached. And now they have discovered that folks are guessing passwords and using guessing algorithms so that they can guess your password and again log into the information like your emails and files on OneDrive, etc., that are on the server. And once you do that, you got access to the information. So again, it's topical and it's happening as we speak. So now that we have basically brought a lot of complexity to the fore, we have essentially introduced you to the threat surface, the notion of how everything can be attacked, and some idea on how to protect them with zero trust. I think now it's time to really start simplifying and saying what you can do about it. So I'm going to start first by saying that the SMB actually has a big advantage. It's a big advantage in getting the latest cybersecurity, and here's why. Because you're not encumbered by legacy systems that are complex to work with. And I'll give you again an analogy. We have complex phone networks, but it turned out that the nations that had very few phone networks jumped and went on to cellular networks, and that gave them an advantage. So similarly, as a small to medium business, you got an advantage because you don't have much of an infrastructure. You've got a simple system where there are files, electronic mail, and so on and so forth, and you can do something about it. So the first thing that I would say to any business is do two things. One, if you're messaging, there are great tools that you should be using for messaging that are zero trust. And the first one that I'd recommend is Signal. It's fully end-to-end encrypted. The Signal folks can't look at your messages. So anytime you're exchanging any sensitive information, you can join Signal and get onto it. And the tool is free and you can join in 30 seconds. So your enterprise and users in there for any kind of critical communication, particularly text messaging, use Signal. The second, I think, Jeremiah, you basically outlined for us that having a strong endpoint security tool on your computers is essential. Why? Because they're modern tools, they detect viruses, they detect escalation of privileges, which is how you know that an attacker is trying to sneak by. and they're inexpensive. It costs a few dollars to put on a computer. So those are the two, immediate things. And then the third thing that I would say where we Prevail come in is to put all your files on a Prevail drive. Again, it's simple, and we'll show you how. It's protected against server attacks, admin attacks, password attacks, and put your critical email communication on Prevail. And again, these are very simple to do, often free, and takes minutes to do so. But before I do so, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jeremiah, for adding further color to this discussion on Zero Trust.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjeev. And I think it's key that part of the point we're driving home here is there are tools available to SMBs, right? And the fact that they're not tied to these legacy systems and these big complex systems, they have a bit of flexibility where it's easier to sort of adapt business process to some of these tools to gain that level of security, right? They don't have to be an enterprise. They don't have to, make major investments in these expensive enterprise tools. There are tools out there like Prevail, like you mentioned with Signal, that can be leveraged. It's not just a matter of protecting that data at a federal level, because there's regulation against that. All data is critical. All these states are coming up with new requirements. Texas is signing one here in the next couple months that has reduced the number of records required to now report. So it's constantly changing. And so the game is being upped constantly, day in and day out, on protecting this information that we may have thought was benign before, right? What's the value of some user, somebody's name, and maybe their address, right? But now we live in a different world, and so to make it simple and bring it practical, as you have, Sanjeev, and in some of the areas that we can talk about from an SMB space, and we're very much an SMB focused organization. We're not specific to any one vertical, so we see a wide variety of different verticals and where this applies. For instance, HR is a very simple one to go to. Right, there is critical employee data that's there. They know quite a bit about you. I mean, other than taking your pulse and getting your vitals, I mean, it's almost like visiting a doctor. They know everything about you. They have tax information, where you live, your contact information, people that, people within your life, payroll documents, tax docs, your social security number, contact information, and this is stuff that's been inherently sitting in systems that aren't practicing necessarily zero trust, right? It's bigger systems that we may not have control of, or it's older kind of legacy systems that don't have security built into them. So that's an area, from an HR perspective. Legal is another big area, right? I mean, we're talking about highly sensitive information that they have about their clients. That is a treasure trove of information for a threat actor. Again, PII, personal identifiable information. There's an attorney-client privilege aspect to that information. Evidence, when we're talking about legal cases, this is all information that needs to be protected at the highest level. The confidentiality of data is critical in some of these areas. Mergers and acquisitions, for example, there's a lot of research data, financial, business information, customer information, highly sensitive proprietary information within that organization. There was an example of, I forget what year it was, but it was the Verizon Yahoo acquisition. And so essentially Verizon discovered that there was a previous data breach within Yahoo during that M&A process. And that cost Yahoo $350 million in that acquisition, not to also account for the $35 million that they were charged from the SEC for the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then $80 million essentially from lawsuits from the shareholders. So you could see, the protection of this data, having zero trust, having protection around this data, it was massive for that particular thing. Again, confidentiality. Another thing that hits home for everybody right now is work from home. There's been some statistics out there and some polls taken, And the majority of employees have said that they share information through messaging and collaboration tools. Just as you mentioned, Sanjay, when people are messaging, they're not thinking about it. They're going straight to the path of least resistance and, hey, this thing and that thing and this file and that person. There could be sensitive information that's being shared in that could be potentially breached. Veritas polled 12,500 office workers in 10 different countries. 71% admitted to sharing sensitive and business critical company data using those tools. So, I mean, it's happening. In the US, 58% said the copies of their business data have been shared during, from messaging. 51% of them have they deleted information entirely. These are people deleting information within the organization. So again, the not protecting that information, and those could potentially lead in sort of regulations, fines and violations for those particular things. So that's another area. One of the other things I mentioned before was incident response. We talked about that exchange situation. Incident response is a very particular chain of events. There is an attorney-client privilege aspect to that. So, and a chain of custody that has to happen within those events. And so protecting that information within that whole cycle, that life cycle of incident response, these are areas of information, and data that could be very much could be valuable and protected with a system like this or a zero trust type environment. And so, those are some of the different ways, but one of them that's key that is probably at the top of everybody's mind that we hear about all the time. And you just mentioned it earlier, Sanjay, we talked about, the pipeline, we talked about solar winds, ransomware. How can you talk about how Prevail would have changed that scenario in the event of, from a ransomware perspective?
Sure, be happy to. And I think it's best if at this point we kind of, you and I are security geeks and we've had a nice discussion, but I think, again, assuming that many of the audience aren't that familiar with, these zero trust systems, I'd just like to do a small demonstration and bring home these points on securing stuff. So on the left on my screen is my phone. And so I had shared with you earlier that, strong zero trust messaging systems exist. Signal is one, WhatsApp is the other. And Signal is the app on the top right, and WhatsApp is the app, the second one from the right at the top. Both are very easy to use, both are free. And it's one of the things that your organization and you can do to, again, make sure that your sensitive information is being secured. We, of course, at Prevail offer the other part, which is electronic mail and file sharing. And so let me show you how you can protect yourself against ransomware, in particular using Prevail. So Prevail has a file sharing part that's called Drive. And it's just a folder like any Office 365, OneDrive folder or Google Drive folder. And here you are when you join Prevail, and you can join for free. You get 10 gigs of free storage. It takes about a minute and a half on the computer, no passwords, and it creates this folder. And underneath it, you can create subfolders. Prevail on the phone is an app. And again, it's got biometric authentication. And what you will see is when you create a folder, it is synced to your folders on your phone. So now only your phone and your computer can see this. There are no passwords associated with it. And what's nice about it is instead of classifying all your information, etc., if you're a paid user and have need for over 10 gig, just throw in all your files and folders in there. So when you do that, what you'll see is, say, here's a folder, it's replicated. What you can do with it is, I'm going to show you this. I'll open up this test folder over here. Here's a test folder. When you have a file, simply drag and drop it. When you drag and drop it over here, notice what it does is it encrypts it, puts a copy of it in the cloud, and you'll see the file, show up on your phone. Now, if you make changes to the file on the right, on the computer or on the phone, a version of it is created. And so, first of all, you got the benefit of having multiple versions of the file. The second benefit is, just like with Dropbox and others, you can share it. So here's a test folder, you can share it. And if you share it to recipients within the company, you can allow them to edit it and further share it. Or if it's particularly sensitive information, you can say view only, in which case you don't even have a copy of that available on the computer. It can only be viewed in a browser, and you can unshare it at any time. So you can say, I'm sharing with a supplier for say 30 days, 60 days, and after 30 or 60 days, it is unshared. So what does this have to do with ransomware? Everything. When you stick all your information into a Prevail drive, and let's say you are even hit with ransomware, remember that the system already encrypts your information as is, which is what ransomware will do, and that there are versions of each file that are updated with each change that's made into it. So what do you do if you're hit by ransomware? Nothing. You basically refuse, since all your data is under Prevail. You, in essence, reach out and you'll be basically brought back to the version of your files that were just prior to when the ransomware hit. And that's because this is, again, a fully encrypted and versioned system. But also importantly, it cannot be hit by an attack on the server, because if they attack the server, all they get is just an encrypted gibberish, whereas your Dropbox, Box, etc. files can be seen on the server. So you can't be disclosing the information. You cannot steal this by guessing your password, because there's no password whatsoever. And you cannot break it through the admin, because no single admin has the ability to do so. And then finally, when you join Prevail, it also gives you an encrypted email capability that's very tightly integrated with your Outlook and Gmail. I'm going to show you that. So here's Outlook. And when you join Prevail, it adds with a single click an encrypted inbox. So suppose this is a user, these are their emails, see that I got some slides for today, etc. And there are, spam and so forth coming in. This is your regular email, you keep it. When you join, it adds an encrypted inbox with the same email address. And look what happens. This is where if somebody sends you an email, you get an email that is fully encrypted. Again, can't be hacked through a password, unlike what you see in the regular email. It can't be hacked through an attack on the admin, and it can't be attacked like happened with the Exchange server. And sending emails is just equally simple. When you send an email, if you're sending it, the message will go, if the other person's not on the system, it can go through the regular Office 365 or Exchange. But if the other person, say Ed Murphy, is on the system, the message automatically gets encrypted. You can put whatever sensitive PII, etc., and you send it. Even if the other entity is on Gmail, whatever. So Ed Murphy, this is Ed Murphy, not a very secure system with Google. Here's the regular inbox, but there's a secure messages tab, and this is where all of the information comes in. So I just sent this demo email, it just showed up. You can reply to it, etc. And similarly, I had sent earlier some sensitive financials, tax returns, etc. And again, if you just want to sign up, it's free. So for example, if you send an email to somebody who's not on the system, they'll be invited to join, and you can join for free. So these are zero trust systems that are at the absolute cutting edge of technology. When the SolarWinds breach occurred, the National Security Agency told the Department of Homeland Security, switch communications to Signal. So that's how they were communicating when these breaches occurred. And what's nice is that you can keep exactly the systems that you have, but if you want to get protection, you join either Prevail for free or add Prevail as a paid user. It's about $20 a user a month with unlimited storage. Throw all your files in there, and there you have it. You have a protection against all of the attack threats that we discussed, which is passwords, admins, and servers, but also protection against ransomware. So I'm going to stop over here, and I think that the audience may very well have a lot of questions on these systems and how do they fit into the enterprise, etc. So let's go open it up to the audience for questions. Jeremiah, any parting thoughts that you have for us before we go there? I'm sorry, I'm remiss.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I really think that brought it home, the simplicity of it, right? Until you actually see it. We're, like you said, we're security geeks. We're talking about all this stuff. A lot of that's just like, wait, how do I do this? It's a simple implementation. I mean, it literally is a matter of minutes. It's free for up to 10 gigs, so people can go try this. It's already in their natural work process. So it's not some new, process that they need to learn. So it literally, in a matter of minutes, they could instantly have this military grade, end-to-end encryption, zero trust system implemented into their business process. And then it's just a matter of them using that internally. And I think that's fantastic.
And I always love to, always say that it is ironical that not just our small to medium businesses, but the CEOs of our top Fortune 500 companies have way worse security than a poor farmer in India. Why? Because a farmer is communicating on WhatsApp, which is, used by billions of people. And so it's ironical that these zero trust systems are widely available, free, and now we're bringing enterprise grade systems for email and files, again initially if you want to for free. So it's an opportunity really to leapfrog the security for Fortune 500 corporate America. So over to questions that the audience may have.
All right, we have one question here. Hi everyone, I'm Orly and I'm the marketing person here at Prevail. Let me just jump in with one question that came. Do I need a Prevail email to use Prevail?
No, you do not. You use your existing email address, whatever it is, and that's the beauty of it. So I'll give you an analogy. I'll first show you once again that when you are using Prevail, again, this is your Outlook, or if you're using Google, it's the same thing. This is your regular email address, and this is where your regular emails come in, and this is your encrypted inbox. It has the exact same email address, and your encrypted emails come in on that. So you'll wonder, like, how can that happen? And it happens because of a pretty simple principle. So again, I'll start with an analogy. If you're an iPhone user, you basically can send a text message on the iPhone messaging app, and it goes to another Apple user as an iMessage, which is blue. But when it goes to another person who's handling, who's perhaps on an Android, it goes green. Those two messages are coming from the same app, from the same phone number. The Apple message is going through the Apple network, and the green message is going through the SMS, the phone company network. So what is essentially happening is that on the encrypted system, a set of keys is assigned to your existing email address. We identify you with your email address, and then the rest of the communication occurs in an encrypted fashion. And so just like you can basically communicate on text messaging from the same app through two completely different channels on your iPhone, similarly on Prevail email, you keep your email address, you keep your existing client, whether it's Google client or Outlook client or any other client for that matter, and yet those messages go through full end-to-end encrypted with the security guarantees that we shared.
I actually have a question for you, Sanjeev. So, one of the key aspects in security, right, is least privilege. I'm going to give you the least amount of privilege necessary for you to perform your job function of data you should see. So how does Prevail play into that? I mean, what role does it play in a least privilege aspect?
Well, I think I'll answer it on a technical basis and then through some examples. I mean, the least privilege, first and foremost in Prevail, we basically restrict the privilege of even an admin. We give them full privileges, but in essence say that you can essentially do things that are very invasive, such as access to everybody's emails, etc., only with permission from the approval group. And that permission can be gained in about 30 seconds, but it's cryptographically enforced. So the principle is both a zero trust principle and a least privilege principle. The other thing is, as I shared with you in the file sharing system, when you're sharing information, you have all of the tools available to essentially grant least privilege. So for example, if you allow somebody to edit documents and share it further, you can allow them to do so. Or you can grant them absolute least privilege, which is say, hey, you can only view the document, and I'm going to allow you to see this document for only a day. And when you set it that way, then the other person can only look at the document. There's no copy of the document on their machines, so nothing to steal, etc. And then even that privilege sort of goes away. So these sorts of things are built into the system. And in fact, systems like Prevail, Signal, etc., are designed with this least privilege principle even on ourselves. So both Signal and Prevail will consider themselves as not trusted. So we have no ability ever to access your information. Our admins have no ability to access that information. And to guarantee that we're doing what we're doing, what we do is we publish fully exactly how security is working in Prevail or in Signal, and then allow anybody to actually verify that by looking at the code that we are actually doing what we're doing. So the principle of least privilege and zero trust extends not only to the systems, but also to the corporations themselves.
Interesting. So if I was an admin of my organization, so I can't even see the data of the people in my realm, and they can't see each other's.
If you're an admin in your organization, no, you cannot by default see everybody's information, because if you do, then guess what happens? If you can see the information by default, see what happened in the Exchange server attack. They basically are privileged to the admin, and now they could look at all the information. But as an admin, there are often situations where you do need to see that information. And so Prevail will allow you to. You can look at a user's files when they leave, or if you have some reason to, or all the emails, or if you're sued, you may want to decrypt all emails and files. But the difference is that no single admin can do it. That admin can do it after gaining permission from, say, 2 other admins, or the owner of the company if there aren't other admins. And so that's what makes the system highly secure, so that either the admin can't go rogue or can be attacked, but at the same time is able to do everything that they are used to. So it protects the admin from being a central point of attack, and at the same time enables them to do the same things that they were used to and they're always used to doing. So
fantastic. I love it. Thank you for that.
Any other questions?
Going once, going twice.
So I think I'll hand over to you, Jeramia, and ask for some concluding thoughts on how you would essentially make SMBs secure. So my own 3 points on that are, if I were advising somebody, I'd say, number one, make use of the free, encrypted tools that are available. Even if you don't want to spend a dime for now, get Signal. If you would like, certainly Prevail. The second thing I would say is I would advocate for very strong endpoint security. I know that you guys have, good thoughts on what make for good endpoint security systems, because at that point you've got, monitoring of your computers, phones, etc. for intrusion with modern security. They are very inexpensive. And third, from a ransomware perspective, I really, really do feel that, throwing all your files and information into a ransomware-proof, solution is something that anybody can do and should do. So those are simple steps that you can take, and you're sort of like 85% there in terms of having the highest level of security that would be the envy of almost any military organization. So.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sanjeev. You know, obviously, thanks for having me. This is fantastic. But I'm going to quote conversation you and I had. I mean, you really broke it down to very simplistic, a very simplistic level. Secure endpoint protection, right? You know, not antivirus. There's endpoint detection and response that's out there. It just is at a higher level for that endpoint, for that desktop, that laptop, whatever it may be. But then it really does come down. Most businesses are based around those endpoints, and then a secure communications platform, and a secure data platform. And essentially, if you have that kind of triad of pieces in place, and obviously you can pick and choose and different pieces with Signal, et cetera, that are free, you're most of the way there. Obviously, security is about layers. There's different aspects to that. There's, you know, messages coming in through email, not necessarily Prevail, but your standard email. There's a lot of different layers to security, but at a base level, if an organization, an SMB, at a very, very operating low cost and ease of implementation could do those couple things, they're going to be fairly protected from the majority of the things that are going on today. You know, where we're seeing the stats with ransomware, phishing campaigns. You know, those solutions will at least reduce dramatically the effects and impacts of those attacks today. So, but outside of that, thank you so much for having me, Sanjeev and Orly. This is a great topic and hit close to home for our audience, for our partners, and I appreciate being here.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. And if there are questions that you have, don't hesitate to reach out at info@prevail, preveil.com. And I hope that you found value in both understanding, you know, what is going on with the threat surface, but more importantly, that there are simple things that you can do to really, you know, vault your security to world-class levels. And those steps are often free, and certainly some things that you can undertake often in a matter of minutes to hours. Thanks very much for joining us.